Okay, hi. Let's see, it's Monday morning here on the East Coast, 11 o'clock. Wanted to do a quick video to review last week and to introduce week 10, right? Um, okay, so again, your posts are really fabulous, and I really appreciate the quality of the discussion we're having online. Um, Last week we didn't basically, we started to talk about capital um, investments and decision making that has long-term implications for your organization, capital investments and capital decisions. And Mary Lou put it succinctly where she said that capital decisions, the consequences of them are for keeps. Um, I really like the way that captured this notion that, um, if you make the decision, it typically involves large sums of money over a long period of time, and so another way of putting it maybe is that there are no do-overs, right? Once you build that building or whatever other major capital investment you make, you're sort of stuck with it. So the decisions are for keeps. There are no do-overs. And because of that, then you have to really make sure that any decision, any capital financial decision is really made with the best set of information you have, so that the decision is as informed as it can be. And this is why there's such an emphasis on making sure that your capital decisions are integrated and are in sync with financial data going backwards and going forwards, right? So that the capital plan just doesn't come out of the blue, but it really fits into your overall vision for the organization and is manageable within the operational capacities, the administrative capacities, um, well, mission and operations, your administrative capacities, and your financial capacities. That's that iron triangle piece from the Linking Money and Mission article, right? So that was generally the gist of last week's readings and our discussions, and it was really fabulous, I thought, how your discussion forums then went deeper than that. There was a discussion there about the relative usage of cash versus debt when you make large financial investments. And we had a nice discussion about that. Remember, you go back to your Monotony case study, right, where they used all their cash in order to expand, buying property and equipment. It made them cash poor, so when they had some issues with their ongoing financial operations, maybe expenses higher than they thought, revenues not as high as they hoped they would be. They were in a cash crunch, right? So they could have um, maybe taken on a little more debt initially, not spent down all their cash, and would have had a little bit more wiggle room, right? Um, but the point there is that well, so we got that thought, and then the other piece that we were talking about was capital decisions are a little risky. They're risky because they're long term, and we don't always know what the future is going to be. Um, but one of you, when I went back to try to find it, I couldn't. Um, Talked about decisions to invest money in a larger facility where you were holding a conference, and you had to put out more money to get the venue, and you hoped that there would be more attendance so that you'd collect the revenues to cover your initial expense. All these, it's a perfect, oh, microcosm or example on a small scale of the big inherent issues with big capital projects. You always take a risk. You always put out some money, hoping that financially and operationally things will turn out right. Hopefully they will. Sometimes they won't, and then you want to make sure you're still in a contingency position where you can uh, make adjustments so you don't go under, right? And so my note here was all investments carry some risk. You want to know what they all are so you are making an informed investment decision before you do it. Okay? And then, sorry about the phone call. And so, yeah. Teresa talked about how she was fairly risk averse because of her experience with the Great Recession of 2008 and what that did to her funding. And so each of you with different experiences, will maybe come down in different places in terms of what amount of risk is palatable for you. But what I also wanted to take just a little bit of time, Catherine asked specifically in one of her posts about how do you actually get to a liquidity target in terms of the dollar amount. If you're working somewhere, what's the dollar amount that my liquidity target should really be? And she didn't think that the equations in Zietlow on page 216, and as Mary Lou said on page 316, thank you, Mary Lou, really helped very much. So I wanted to just talk about this for a moment. This is nowhere in the readings, but I think they're the things you need to think about when you are trying to calculate for your organization what a liquidity target should be. And so up here, I think there are 4 things you need to consider. The first is your normal cash flow needs during the year, right? If you go through the months and then the different years, you'll some months you'll get in more revenue than your expenses, so you'll have a surplus. Other months you'll be spending more money than revenues actually come in. So you need money to cover the dips, obviously. And this straight line out here was an example of how CTC, as we discussed and discovered, had like a 250, 300,000 ongoing cash flow problem, right? Because they always received their government funding months after they actually had to expend the funds to operate the programming. So think about what your long-term cash flow needs are and make sure that your liquidity target can cover that cash flow, those cash flows needs, the ups and downs. The second thing then is actually your profitability. There may be some years that you expect that you're going to make money, but I'm sure that there are some years where you're going to lose money, right? Businesses go through this, nonprofits go through it as well. Despite your best hopes and your best projections, sometimes things don't work out right, so you have losses. Look back to your history and think about, how have you done? And going forward, think about how you will do. So, whatever that is on the lower side, you want to make sure that you have cash to cover it. Okay? And then the other thing that Zietlow puts in as a consideration is the certainty. Where is it? It's over here. The certainty of your funding or your cash flow. In other words, you've projected cash flow up here based upon what you thought was going to happen, right? But think back, and in the CTC example, you had, you knew that you were going to have like this 250,000, maybe $300,000 ongoing cash flow issue. But what happens if, in fact, and this has happened to me, and I think I mentioned this in one of my earlier posts, what happens when state government doesn't pass the budget? And this happened actually in Connecticut recently again, and I guess it's resolved finally. But the budget was due July 1, and as of mid-October, they still had not finalized a state budget, and so all the nonprofits that were having, I presume this happened, this is what it said in the papers, the nonprofits that had contracts with the government, well, they were still providing the social services, right? The homeless programs, the mental, I don't think they call it mentally retarded anymore, but the MR programs, any of those human services programs, they were running them, but they weren't getting any money. And this happened to us, a nonprofit that I was the COO of in 1998. And I think I said how we ran up $1.5 million in cash flow problems, that the bank thought we were going under, as opposed to just having this cash flow problem. So anyway, so you want to think about the certainty with which the funding's actually going to come. And if you think there are times when the funding's not going to come, you have to figure out how you're going to cover that, either through a cash reserve or through an adequate line of credit. Okay? And then just lastly, at the very bottom here, you want to think about the relative size of pilots that you might want to undertake out of your cash reserve, so that you can run a pilot, see if the opportunity that you think may be there is actually there, and then then you can get more funding to do the program ongoing. But how much might that be? And of course you can't know the answer to that question, but you can maybe get a sense of the magnitude of the size of what a pilot might be, and then you just try to have that as a little nest egg. It's sort of like with your own personal finances, right? You think about how much money you might need over the next year or two or three before you put money in the stock market, and you say, well, I don't know, I'm not going on any major trips, but I do have a kid who's going to be coming up to college, so I'll put some in the stock market, but I'll want to be able to take it out at some point. So maybe I put it in, take it out at some point when the market's not tanked, right? So maybe I put them in stock market for a little while, since it seems to be going up at the moment, but I'm going to take it out at the first sign that it starts going down, and then put it into bonds, because that's a safer place to put it, and it's a guaranteed return, at least on the interest side, maybe not on the principal side. Or for an older guy like me, they always say put more of your money into fixed income, because you don't want to have it all in the stock market for when it tanks and you have to sell off your stocks in order to pay for your food expense at the time that the market tanked. Okay, I really went off track there, but the point being, just approximate a little bit more for those for what you think might be a reasonable expense in the future that you really haven't planned for at any point. Okay, so I would say that there are these four things then that should go into your liquidity target amount. One has to do with the cash flow. One has to do with the variability of your profit margin year to year. One has to do with the certainty with which funds that you're counting on will actually come in. And then lastly, a little reserve for those contingencies. Okay. Okay, so um, that's liquidity targets as I see them, and how big or small they should be. Okay, so we're into week 10. Week 10 is about actually doing some math to try to appreciate that the value of a dollar that you spend today on a capital project is probably greater than the value of the dollar that you'll get returned in the future due to inflation. And so there's this notion of present value of money, and then the notion of net present value, meaning the value of the money that you spent today versus the value of the flow of money coming to you in the future. And if you just say that a dollar today has the same value as the dollar in the future, you'll miscalculate actually the actual value of the flow of money out of your organization when you make a capital investment and the value of money coming into your organization um, at some future time. Okay, and I don't know. In the short term, these things don't, you know, aren't always maybe conscious, but I'll just say that the first car that I ever bought that I can remember was a Honda Civic um, station wagon, and I bought it for $3,600. That was in the mid to late 70s. Um, Obviously, that was a long time ago, but also obviously, you know, you can't buy a new car, certainly not a new Honda Civic for $3,600. So while in the short term, uh, present value and inflation doesn't seem to really amount to much maybe, if you take it out over the 10, 20 years, sometimes 30 years of a capital investment, like a 30-year mortgage, um, uh, the importance of understanding present value and net present value, um, comes into focus. Okay, long video. I'm sorry, 17 minutes. So I'll close there, and I'll see you online. Thanks.